Hello and welcome to our Fund Accounting and Grant Management webinar. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to join us today. We're really hoping that you find the information that you get here today gives you some valuable insights and helps you run your nonprofit organization. There is a Q&A window available to you. If you have any questions as we go throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat window, and we'll do our best to answer the questions at the end of the webinar. And throughout, we will have one or two questions for the audience as well. So let's get started. Just first want to start with a bit of an introduction. Also go through our next sort of overview of the cloud applications that we're going to be speaking about today for nonprofit organizations. We'll briefly highlight a success story, and then we will jump right into a demonstration, which is really sort of a show and tell. I'll be doing lots of telling while I show of our Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central solution with fundamentals for nonprofit accounting. And then, as I said, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So I am Barbara Allen. I'm going to be your tour guide today, and I am going to start with just a little bit about 360 and then get right into product. So 360 Visibility, we have been around for quite almost 19 years. It'll be this, actually it is 19 years, founded in 2003. We are what we call a full Microsoft partner. So we're really technically what we call a tier 1 Microsoft Gold partner, and we are all things cloud. So what that means is we are dealing with all of the various solutions from Microsoft, including the Dynamics 365 suite, which is what we're going to be looking at today, one component of that. So Business Central as well as Sales or CRM. We also deal in Office 365. Everybody on this call probably uses that today. Any of your Excel, Outlook, Word, and then also other components such as Teams and things like that are included in that. And we also do managed Azure services, so we can help guide you through the various pieces of the cloud and help manage that for you, as well as security. A few of our our clients, in particular in the not-for-profit sector. So you may recognize some of these names. You may be related to some of these organizations or at least heard of them. So a question for everyone attending today. I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the challenges that you are facing right now with your current accounting solution? So please share your comments in the Q&A window. Give everybody a moment. So is anyone having any challenges today that's bringing you here, looking for a solution? We'd love to hear about it. Great, so managing funds, reporting, business intelligence. These are some of the things that I'm seeing. So that's great. Okay. So these are exactly the solutions that we are going to talk about, in particular managing funds and overall access to information to run your organization. So the solution we're going to take a deeper dive look at today is called Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central and Fundamentals. It is a single comprehensive solution that will connect all your business processes, various systems, and your team in your organization so that you can work together with a tool that's very familiar looking, being in the Microsoft space. Everything from, fund, grant, and loan management, finance management, of course, approval workflows and controls, budgeting, allocations, looking at encumbrance and commitments, as well as procurement. All of these and reporting, of course, are all wrapped into one comprehensive system. And this is what we will be demonstrating today. So before we get into the solution, just a quick statement really, or a success story from one of our clients, the United Church of Canada. When we met them, they were very much probably in a similar boat to the person who dropped in the comments about struggling with reporting one system as well as fund accounting. They really wanted to get onto a modern platform, so they're running an on-premise older platform. They could not really keep up with growth. It was constantly, they were, adding new reporting needs and new entities, new funds, and they were really struggling to manage all of that. And they really had a lot of complicated integrations going back and forth through, different reconciliation systems, donor management systems, and so on. And they wanted more control over how funds were being allocated and spent, and oversight onto that. So they implemented Dynamics 365 Business Central with fundamentals. We helped them simplify workflows. We put in place some very specific fund accounting rules and allocations for nonprofits. They implemented budget controls, and they really took everything off of the on-premise model, saving them a lot of IT costs, licensing costs. They didn't need to manage servers anymore, and by putting everything into the cloud. Okay. All right. So what we want to do today is get into the software and into the solution. How can it help you? So I'm going to be going through only a handful of very key functionalities. Particularly, I'm going to dive deeper into managing funds and talk about that and how funds are used, how they're set up, how they act in the system. We're going to look at allocations, as that's always a really critical need to allocate things across departments, across funds, etc. And we're going to look at overall business controls, we'll say, business rules and approvals are part of that. And as we begin, the actual software demo, I'm also going to go through and just show you what this modern and connected experience looks like. So we'll talk a little bit about the interface at the beginning. Okay, so first, fund management. That is one of the critical things at the nonprofit level of accounting, right? It is one of the core foundations. It's not the only important thing, but it is probably what is bringing most of you here today. So funds really are required at every transaction throughout the system. There is automated fund balancing. We're going to talk a little bit more about how types of funds and classes of funds can be set up and used for reporting. Also looking at, restrictions that can be put in place to help you manage when a fund can be posted to, when it can't, notes on how it's used, and so on. So giving you all the power to enter your transactions by funds, and then also thereby report back out of the system by fund. Okay. From there, we'll move on to allocations. And again, allocations being very critical in terms of distributing expenses. There's several types in the system. There are allocations at the line level, so they are available on every document and every journal type, and they can be done as a line, so fixed percentage. They can be done when you input something, it gets marked up, and there's rules around that. We'll talk about that. You can batch allocations and run them as a month-end process. So that's common if you're doing, overhead allocations at the end of all your expense postings. You can also do what we call an indirect cost allocation, which is you may have a cost recovery, or you may be assigning an admin percentage onto a transaction. Okay. And also there's, of course, labor distribution to help you distribute payroll expenses. And then our last key bucket of functionality that we're going to dive into are approvals and controls. And there are a number of things in the system that help with this. There are approvals themselves, which again can go on to a document, to a specific line on a purchase invoice, for example. There are budget controls set up and budget approvals, or you can send entire batches for approvals. We're also going to talk about business rules and some security things that are also part of the control bucket. Okay, so I'm going to leave the slide deck now for a bit, and we're going to go into Business Central and take a look. So I'm going to flip between two different companies in Business Central, but Business Central is multi-company. You are able to set up as many entities and organizations as you need to manage. That's fine. And this is the home page, as we call it. So I've already logged in and I'm taking a look at this, and my home page is really associated to my role. So my role can be assigned, as you can see here. I'm just going to sort of log in and see. I can change my settings. Right now I'm logged in as a business manager. There are a lot of out-of-the-box roles inside Business Central that you can switch to that give you different views. And what they do is just tailor the experience that you have on your screen to try to help direct you to the most important things to your day. I can also change companies here. And then of course we just have some settings on dates and so on. Okay. The navigation throughout Business Central, there's a number of ways to navigate. There are, again, these menus are arranged by my role. So I am set up as a business manager. I may have things in finance that I can do. So they're grouped here, cash management grouped here, and so on. So this is our ribbon menu. And then we also have a number of other quick add things here. If I'm not sure what I'm looking for, I can always use the search. So the search is intelligent. So if you start typing in perch, it'll start bringing up everything that starts with that. So if I was to say perch invoice, it should narrow down that. It'll first list for you different windows that you can go to, and it'll tell you the type of window. And then it also will start asking you, well, did you want to get help? Is there documentation that you want to search for? And you would then go out into Microsoft's extensive help site. I also can bookmark things. So let's say that purchasing codes isn't on my menu, but I want to have it shortcutted. So because I go here often, if I bookmark that, it will now be there for me and it will show up under this menu here. Okay, so always trying to make things easy to navigate. If we take a little look at our vendors list, we'll just talk about kind of how pages can look. So you can change how pages look to you. You can take it from being a tile to a list, which is probably more common. And everything that is in a list or a page almost always can be pushed out to Excel. So you can share it and I can open in Excel. I can share it in Teams. Again, highlighting that link with the Microsoft products. I can copy the link and send it to someone, etc. List pages also are sortable. So this is a pretty short list, but let's say I wanted to sort it by, you know, the opposite way for vendor number, or I wanted to narrow down to a vendor, I can also filter. So filters are easily applied by just saying I want to filter by vendor number and I want to see everything that starts with a 2. So this is very simple to do and work with data inside all of the pages of Dynamics 365 Business Central. Okay, so if I just head on back, also, actually, I'll go back into our vendors. Another note you'll see is a sidebar. Right now I'm filtered. For every record I'm clicking into, we're seeing these vendor statistics change. If I don't feel like I want to see this, I can hide this window or I can leave it on. I also can drill into any of this data. So it's giving me the vendor balance, which is also displayed here, so either place, and I can further drill in and look at the information and get down to the details that are making up that vendor balance. Throughout the system, in this fact box, you will also see what we call attachments. So for every record, you can add a link. This could be a link to a SharePoint document stored, something stored on OneDrive. You could actually just attach the PDF itself, and also you have the ability to create notes. So this could happen on a vendor record, could happen on a purchase invoice, it could happen on a general ledger transaction, wherever, whatever you're doing in the system. So these are just a few of the sort of general navigation you'll see throughout the system. Also, you are able to personalize what you're seeing. So if we head back up here to my setup tab, there's a personalize button. And what that means is you are able to add if there are fields available. We'll just go in here and we may wish to add, for example, the payment terms code. So I can quickly just put that in here and it now is added into my list. If I don't like where it is, for example, I can shift it around. Perhaps I don't want the phone number anymore. I could remove that as well. So you are able to personalize all pages within Dynamics 365 Business Central to how you want to work and see things. And when I click done, this will be saved for me. Okay. All right, so that's a little bit about the navigation and the general features of Business Central. Let's dive into fund accounting, or fund management. So as we said, the funds are the core of the accounting. They are required. They are tracked very specially with inside Business Central and fundamentals. They must be used on all transactions when they are fully defined by you. So your list can contain as many funds as you like and need to operate your organization. Okay, so if we take a look at our fund list, we have a number set up, so defined either by a number or it may have more of a word description. So if we take a look at, for example, our general fund, we can open up what we call the fund card. Okay, so the fund is essentially defined by you and a number of things. You'll see a lot of information on here. Some of it is relevant, some of it is not. Most of it isn't required, except for, of course, you're going to need a fund name and a fund number. Fund class code and fund type code are two very important pieces. And these, again, are defined by you, how you want to classify and type your funds. They are both reportable, so meaning they are also tagged along with the transactions so that you are able to report on these afterwards. Okay, the class define the restriction type, and it also defines where this is going to get closed out, basically, when you do the year-end close. So if we take a look at our fund classes that we have set up, I'll just expand that. They define the net asset account number that's going to be used, which could be all the same, or it could be unique per fund. And it also determines if it has restrictions or not. Okay, so this is one of the really critical pieces on the fund setup. You can also block funds if they're no longer used later on, and so on. The other key thing is if you want to restrict the usage of a fund in terms of posting to it, you can define a posting from and posting to date. So let's say a fund is only active for a single fiscal year or a quarter or several years, whatever that may be. You can put in those dates to ensure that that's being restricted. Okay. We also have a few notes. These are just more note memo fields. So if there's a usage restriction, so if this was only to be used for education or renovation or something like that, you could put that information in here. At the moment, it doesn't do anything but give information. If there's a grant related to this fund that has different sets of dates, you can enter that information and so on. Okay. If we look at the source, Again, we have some information if you wish to track the source of this fund. So you can enter their name, address, etc. if it's an organization or an individual. Okay. Let me just shrink some of this up. Dimensions. This may be a new concept for some on the call if you're not familiar. They are, again, pieces of information that get tagged to transactions, and they flow throughout the system so that you can report back on them. You can filter, you can write reports based on these dimensions. So if there are particular, for example, in our system here, we have a department code, a region code, a program and event code that is in use. We have more available to us, but these are the ones that are in use. So if this particular fund was for a specific region or a specific program, etc., then you could say that that dimension must default with this fund, and then that'll automatically fill in for you and you don't need to worry about it. And then we have basic audit trail information that you'll see throughout the system. Okay. So that's our fund card, and that's the individual funds. The fund accounting part, the rules around how funds are accounted for, is driven by our fund accounting setup. And this also has a lot of information. We'll just highlight some of the key things. Essentially, what's happening with this setup here is we're determining what controls are being used. This controls how entries are going to post from funds via accounts payable, receivables, and bank or cash entries. And there's, depending on the selection that you choose, which I can't edit this at this point because I've used this company, not easily anyway, is you can determine for each of the areas what fund is going to be used. So there's a few things. You can use the fund that is associated with the purchase line, or you can use the fund that's associated with the other options are whether or not you want to use the document itself or a balancing fund. Okay, so in a distributed method, AR and AP entries are going to follow the same line, the same fund as the lines on the purchase invoice. So what does that mean? So if I have a purchase invoice that has to fund 001 and 002, that means the accounts payable portion of that entry that posts is going to follow to those funds as well. If you're using a default balancing fund, that means that everything will flow through one fund on your assets, but will not follow the lines, and due to and due from entries will get made. Okay. So there's really those two main methods, as well as you can use a bit of a hybrid, but we won't get into that today. But just note there's a lot of flexibility about how you want to set up and flow your fund accounting. Okay. Always note that funds must always be in balance, and therefore the system is set up to make automated due to and due from entries for you per fund, and those accounts can be defaulted and configured so that happens automatically. So let's take a little bit of a look at what some of these concepts look like on a document. So let's head over to a purchase invoice, and I'm going to call up one that we've already done. And we're going to take a look at, you saw that our settings were set to follow the fund on the purchase lines. And you'll see here that we have a purchase invoice. This is to Blue Cross. And you can see that we are going to go to two different funds, Fund 01 and Fund 02. And we have our two amounts here. So there's a concept of previewing the posting in Business Central, which is great for making sure you don't have mistakes or issues, because it will call them out for you to correct. So if we take a look at the preview posting, it's going to generate a number of lines, and we can look and see what it would look like from the general ledger once it posts through, and that's what we'll take a look at. And you'll notice we have 5 lines posted here. So if we look at our first one, we'll see our initial $1,000. That's going to our expense account. Then we have that being distributed. So you see it's a distributed fund, and that's being entered into the $1,000 is to payables. This is a payables account. And then we see our 500 also being distributed on the payable side. So what that's doing is ensuring that the fund is balanced because there is no crossover between the funds. And then we have what we call an information entry here, which is helpful to just recap for you that it was a $1,500 payable invoice that was being posted. This line doesn't post, it's just information. And at any time you can also see what was your entered amounts versus what got distributed. Okay. So that's how that would look like in a distributed fund accounting model. So just getting some warnings here. To talk a little bit more, demonstrate more about the automated balancing by fund, let's take a look at a GL entry that has crossed funds. So if I go into my general journals, I believe this is one that I've crossed. Nope. This one here. So if we take a look at this entry, this is a general journal. So we have our typical fields here. We have what type of account it is. It's a GL account. So essentially I'm, accruing accounting fees as an expense. So I'm making an accrued expense and it's going from my general fund to my library fund. $1,000, $1,000. So we already heard that you cannot have unbalanced funds. If I take this and now do a preview on this, we can see the automated entries. So we see that we have 4 entries being made. And you will see that we now have our initial entries to our 2 GL accounts. And then we have a due to and a due from that have been also created. And these accounts are being pulled from the setup that I have created for the interfund accounting setup. So you don't need to worry about balancing and reconciling because the system is doing that for you. Okay. So while we're in the general journal, this really does lead into our next section, which is looking at allocations and different pieces of information that also can be done with a general journal. If we want to talk before we get to allocations, there's another useful item. When you're keying journal entries, you'll see here I would have had to enter the fund if I wanted to enter additional dimensions, as we talked about for department and program code, region code, event code. I'm sort of scrolling down here to do that. There is another feature that we'll take a look at called autofill. And autofill also becomes one of the business rules that we're going to talk about later, in that it gives you an automated way of gathering things together. So if I don't want to have to remember all the time what utilities should be coded to in terms of the GL account number, the fund number, and the department code, I can create a code for that I simply select when I'm doing an entry. So whether that be a journal entry, purchase order, or purchase invoice, I can choose this and this information will default for me. And I can define further things down here. So it can be a very excellent way, especially if you have purchase requisitions in your system and you don't want everybody having to memorize the chart of accounts. You can create very specific codes that are meaningful to them that they know to use, and they can just code the requisition and send it off for approval. Allocations. This is really, we could have shown an allocation on that last journal entry, but let's talk a little bit about it first before we go ahead and make any of them. There are 3 types of allocations. And these are automated allocations within the system. They are not things that you're doing outside in Excel and then coming back and keying in. So under allocations, we have basically two major types, line allocations and markup allocations. And then we also have batch allocations, which is really just a way of running a number of allocations en masse in a batch. So markup allocations we'll talk about first. And for example, I mentioned earlier the indirect cost allocation, and what that could look like is defining, or it could also be a way of charging, let's say, an admin fee on something for time that's worked. So you have our code, we have our description, then we have filters for that allocation. And what we can do is determine the conditions under which this allocation would kick in. If we used it. So we're going to say that it's going to be on Fund 03 whenever this account 81-110 is utilized. And then you could further filter that down into very specific departments or regions and so on. Down here, what we're doing is, I don't have a description, but you can, so this can be the markup on the cost, and then this is the offset as to where should that post to. So for every I believe this is travel expense, no, supplies expense, we're going to add a markup of 10% and charge that off to the admin department, and the offset is going to go into this account and to this department. And that's really how an indirect cost markup works. You don't need to do anything to book that 10% difference. It automatically will do that. Okay. And then we go back to allocations, we have what's more commonly used, I would say, for month end and just distributing cost are line allocations. And line allocations are essentially a preset fixed percentage breakout of an expense from a single line of entry to multiple. So classic example is redistributing rent or utilities or something like that, or a certain, redistributing IT costs to all programs, for example, things like that. So they are manually selected when you're doing an entry, or they could default from a vendor. They can't even default from a fund. So if you have a fund whose, any cost or anything that's hit that fund is automatically distributed to multiple programs within that fund with a set percentage. So whether it be income received or expenses incurred, you could set it up on that fund and it would automatically post to the various programs every time. Okay, so let's take a look at the line allocations. So we have our departmental one. I kept it simple. We'll look at this one. And what we do is we have department and program for admin expenses. So what's been set up here is you'll see the total percentage is 100%. It must come to 100%, so you must distribute the lines here evenly. So what this is saying is that for every time that we are hitting the dev with G&A allocation, we're going to hit this department, and that department code is going to get 15%. The development, and I forget what this program is, I think it's fundraising, is going to get 10%. Admin is going to get 30% to the general program and 45% to the fundraising program. So maybe not a great example, but you'll be able to see how this works. Okay. We can also default this from a vendor, as I said. So if we go into that, we can take a look. Find my vendors. So for example, if I always wanted to default Staples, I could default both, just trying to find it, the fund number, and I can also default an allocation code. Okay. All right. So if we take a look at a journal again, because this is an easy way to look at this. Okay. So now when we post and preview this, we should see it split out into the various departments. So we have here the first combination of department and program, second, and the admin, and we'll see this is going into the accrued expenses. Okay, so this is me entering one line, but it's being split, the cost is being split between the various departments. And of course, we're staying within one fund here, so no balancing entries being made. Okay, so those are the two key allocation methods. Layered on with allocation methods are a number of other business rules that can kick in and come into play. Business rules are things that essentially drive validation and approval and some of the security. So there's a few types of business rules. We have validation rules as the first one. So you may have seen here, there's a status column that is in a number of screens that we've looked at already. It is on journal entry lines, it's on invoice entry lines, and it's even on batch lines. And what that is this is the system programmatically looking to see what validation rules were set up and is this entry meeting those rules. So we don't actually have many enabled, but I do have some set up that we can just talk through. So in terms of validation rules, for example, expenses, this is a very simplistic one that we can walk through. And what it's going to enforce is to say when this GL number, so whatever is over on this side, when this happens, then this must happen. So what this one is set up is to say is when the GL account number starts with 8, and 8 are our expenses in terms of G&A expenses, so general administration expenses, then you must have a department code, and this filter is not blank. And if we click here, it'll show what the options are for that condition. So this is ensuring that all the general admin expenses are getting coded to a department if this was enabled. There are a number of other things you can filter on here to make conditions exist. It could be, depending on what you're using, it could be dimension based like the program code, region. It could be if a certain user created an entry, then another condition must happen, or a vendor. Okay, so these are some basic validation rules. They're usually restricting users to a specific range of GL accounts, customers, vendors, or dimensions. Okay, so if these are not valid, you will not be able to post. The other type of business rules that we have are what we would call approvals. So approvals they really are two flavors. There are approvals at the document level, so the overall document, and there are approvals at the line level. So approvals at the line level must be met before it can carry on. You can stagger these or stack these so that you have line approvals and document approvals. So perhaps there's a purchase order or a purchase invoice that is for multi programs or multi funds. They may need different approvals for each of those lines, and someone else also needs an oversight on the total spend with that vendor. That's a case where you would have document line approvals and the overall document. It will not process it for the overall document until all the lines have been approved, because that would be rework for someone. Okay, so they can be set up fairly intelligently with validation rules as well to flow through the workflow engine. Okay, so let's take a look at a document approval, I should say. Actually, what we'll do is go into the document itself. So purchase invoice is a common one, as is purchase order. Generally, we see people use one or the other. The line is very similar to this in terms of approval. Again, it looks a lot like our validation. When this happens or when this condition exists, then this must happen on the right side. So what we have set here is a very basic, if the document type is a purchase invoice. And again, I have options here. Again, I could look at routing certain funds or certain vendors or certain GL accounts to approval for different conditions. I'm saying any invoice that's over 0, it's more than 0, must be approved. And what type of approval do I want? So in the system, there's different approval types. We can send it specifically to a default approver ID all the time. And what that'll do is send it to the same person, the same approver every time every purchase invoice is sent. Not very dynamic. You can also send it to a specific user and it'll go to that user every time. You can also send it to a group. So a group, as what we have set up here, means there's multiple people that must approve this and they can be sequenced. So if we take a look at this setup, it's not going to let me set up. I'll set up a new one here. The code, what you can do is set up a number of people, and I can say that the administrator must look at it first, and then Megan must be the second person to approve. You may even put multiple people in the same sequence, so you can control this sequence. So if I say that both admin and Megan are in sequence 1, that means that one or the other must approve before it moves down into the next level. So there's a fair bit of sophistication that can happen between the approval rules, the validation rules, and how you might use a workflow user group. You can also attach the approver to the user setup themselves, where you can show that a user has an approver. So for example, if I take a look at that and I look at my user setup, what's happening here is that Megan has an approver of the admin, and that's where anything that she sends for approval, unless the rule states something different, will go. And then we also have our substitute. I can substitute, if I'm an approver, I can substitute this and then delegate that approver to someone else. Okay, so a fair bit of flexibility there as well. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like with a purchase journal. Sorry, with a purchase document. So if I look at Canada Computers, for example, I have I've set up a rule that says that if anything is going to the IT department as an expense for the general fund, that it must get approved. You'll see here our status is on approval hold because it's not been sent, it's not been approved yet. So what I can do is if I change this department, you'll notice that our status will change. Oh, actually, I've already sent it, so sorry, it doesn't want to do that. If I was to change that, it would change our status here. So you can easily send for approval by going request approval and send for approval request. I can also cancel an approval request if I've already sent it. So I've already sent it once, I want to cancel it. I can go ahead and do that as well. Approvals are sent via an email, and you get the approver gets that notification in their inbox. They also can see the approval within inside Business Central. And if I go here, I'm able to see anything that is sent by me and anything that's sent to me for approval. So because I delegated that one, I did not delegate that one, I can't see it, but if I go to sent by me, I can see that I sent, and this is the person that has to approve it. Okay. So that's a little preview on how you can use approval workflows. They are editable, they're configurable, and they also are present for all types of transactions within the system. We also have, last thing I want to sort of highlight before we take questions, is budget rules. So back to controls and budgeting. Budgets can be set up in the system. If we take a quick look at what that looks like. In the system, I can scroll through. Budget has not really been entered for a ton of things here. But if we take a look at software, for example, at a glance, I can see what my budget was. I can also see what was committed. So what have I got that needs to be approved, the purchase requisition, and once it's been issued to a PO, it becomes an encumbrance on my budget. So it'll shift from this column to this column. And of course, when paid, it becomes an actual. So there's always a calculation going here showing what's available, which is really your budget minus your encumbrance, commitments, and actuals. Okay. Budget controls also can control the spending against the budget. So setting a budget doesn't mean people aren't going to spend it. However, what can be set up are budget rules as well. So if we take a look at a budget control, what you can do is set it so that if a budget is exceeded, you can generate a warning or an error. An error will stop any further transactions for help from happening. So basically here what we have set up is we have said which budget are we looking at. So we're looking at our operating budget. Do we want it to be a year-to-date calculation or life-to-date or the entire year or just the period that we want to examine when we're doing the calculation for the warning? You can include unposted journals and invoices or not. You can include commitments or not, and encumbrances as well as requisitions. So this is a choice of how many things that are maybe not fully committed in the system do you want to count against the budget. Okay, and then you can set a tolerance percentage or amount as well. So meaning that if you are under that tolerance and your budget's about to be exceeded by a purchase invoice, it will allow you to go ahead without that warning or that error. Okay, so that's just one of the controls we can put in place for the budget. Okay. So that is everything I really wanted to walk through. It was quite a lot. Hopefully everyone got some great information out of that. And what we'll do now is just go back into our presentation and really just wrap up with any questions. Okay, so what we've just looked at again was Dynamics 365 Business Central with fundamentals. So it's a way of connecting your organization, enabling you to have more visibility and make decisions and use a very flexible, I hope you saw that, and modern system. All right, so we had a question or two here. I will try to address them. If I can't, I will follow back up with you with perhaps some additional information. So we have a question around grant loans to parishes and hold savings for all parishes. So read-only licenses, yes, read-only licenses are available. It's called a Teams user. We'll follow back up with you after the presentation and we can speak to you a bit more about that. When you're transacting in the system, you're using a full license, which is what I was using. But if you want people to view only, you can use a Teams license. And what people view and what people do in the system is very configurable, because this is probably another question that will come up next. With permission setting, you can restrict them from, perhaps they can enter purchase invoices, but they can't make payments. You could also restrict that somebody can only see one fund. So your parishes that only want to be able to see a trial balance for their fund or their loans, you could restrict it so they would be able to view transactions only for that particular set of data. Someone asked, is this Tangicloud for the fund tracking? Yes, this is. So we showed it's actually called Fundamentals by Tangicloud. So it's Dynamics 365 Business Central with Tangicloud Fundamentals is what you just saw. Okay, and I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. So I think we had some in that I've missed. Yes, you can attach documents to the fund card. Pretty much everywhere you will see, a lot of my windows, I had the window closed to give more real estate, more visibility. There is definitely an attachment and notes feature there. Questions on the shortcut dimensions. Once we use shortcut dimensions 5 code for purpose for 1, can we use shortcut dimension for purpose 2 for? I'm not sure I understand this question. I may want to follow up with you on that. So in what I just demonstrated, fund is not actually a dimension. It is handled by the software as a dimension would be, but with more features and more robustness in that you saw that we can close net assets to specific accounts for funds, and there's interfund accounts set up attached to funds. So it is as relevant as a global dimension for those of you that are are already familiar with Business Central, but it is more than that. So if you've already used a shortcut dimension for a fund, you could repurpose that, and we have done that with other organizations that have transitioned to Business Central with fundamentals. But yes, if you could reach out to John with that question, we'll have a more in-depth conversation. Yes, you can purchase this at the fund module through 360 Visibility. Again, reach out, give us your contact information. We can follow up with you on that. We are a Microsoft partner, and we are a partner selling and implementing and supporting the fundamentals application as well. Let's just see. Can Business Central interface with ADP, Workforce Now, and Beanworks? Well, the short answer is yes, anything can be interfaced. It's a matter of whether that's out of the box or something that we have to work with you and Workforce and Beanworks on. It's a bit of a technical answer, but Business Central is really based integrations on web services, which is a very commonly used platform now for systems to speak to each other. So I am very confident that if we spoke to Workforce and Beanworks, that we probably could work with them if there is not a connector out of the box. There are several connectors for different applications published by Microsoft and by their vendors in the App Store, and if not, partners like ourselves can help you create that API and even train your team how to create that API. Let's see, do I have any new questions? We're almost out of time. These are awesome questions. Thank you. I think, did I miss any? I hope everybody saw what they expected to see. Feedback is welcome. If there's anything else that you would like us to follow up with you more directly on, please again, reach out to John. His email is there, or myself. I'm not sure if my email is published there. Okay, so John's also dropped my email in the chat for anyone. Okay. Well, I'm here for a few more minutes if anybody has any more questions. Oh, let's see, I think we have a new one. Thank you all. Again, I don't see any new questions coming in. I'll give everybody maybe another partial a minute. And I just want to say thank you for joining today. It was, I hope again that you found it useful, and reach out if we can help you further.